All right, everyone. Welcome to Headspace Live. We are back on again with my man Brandon Nicely.
Hello, hello.
Every Wednesday, 1 p.m. We just pick a few topics that we're passionate about and we're gonna discuss them. So today we're gonna talk about how bad teams make bad ventures and vice versa. Talk about life rhythms and how the correlation between life rhythms and high performance. We're going to talk about freedom in America. This is just some stuff that I've been writing about in my new book. You can always leave us a comments and questions in whatever you're watching in the comment section. We try to answer all of them. Here we go. All right, buddy, are you ready? What what have we got here?
Yes, sir. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday to you, my friend. It's I love actually getting together and doing this live because it sort of interrupts the routine a little bit, and you
hmm
go, okay, every once in a while it's nice to stop and just go live and share thoughts and have this sort of this pure expression of stream of consciousness, the things that we care about, things that we may have insights into that might be helpful to our audience. So yeah, let's talk about bad teams equals bad ventures. What does that mean exactly? You and I geek out on that quite a bit.
Yeah, I think so. The question is, what is a bad team? Um, well, first of all, if you're trying to build a good venture, ideally, it's a very expensive process. So I think the classic sort of first mistake on the timeline, sequentially, if you will,
Yeah.
is, sort of like partnering up with whoever you run into.
Hmm.
Have you ever had like we had one experience that you're familiar with that
Yes,
we
we do.
spent a few $1 million turning a company around, and this particular person who was like the chief technical officer, met this guy on an airplane, and he's like a CEO of an energy company, and I'm like, and he's like, "Whoa, CEO! I need a CEO," you know, and so they end up joining up, but when the story progressed and
Yeah.
things started becoming stressful, it was a very poor match.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of matching. There's a matching. It's kind of like the dating process. We could talk about the process, or we could also talk about, kind of how people, what are the sort of typical ways to, or people that you want to actually,
Yeah.
connect with.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, to me, what seems crazy and remarkable is that we do when we start something new. Let's say, right? We do market research. We develop products. We spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, oftentimes millions of dollars, into creating something new. And we do. There's so much data and so much research and so much skill prep going on, and then we just randomly match up with people that can mess up the whole thing, right? It just seems incredibly irrational and always and almost I don't know. I don't think careless is the word. What is the word? I don't know what the word is, but it just seems it's insane.
Reckless.
Exactly reckless is the word. It's just insane because there's
But it
such
doesn't seem reckless. I mean, here's the thing, the
yeah
nature of the beast. You have to be careful. This is one of the things I think we have to do a little soul searching as entrepreneurs. We have to recognize that we are not necessarily built in general to be able to, like, we're not, we're not like conflict avoiders. Like, we tend to run into the front
that
lines, right,
yes we
when there's
do.
an
Yep.
opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you're built that way, you're like a charge of the mountain kind of person, you may not consider the risks, and your emotions might
Yeah.
overrun or overrule your thinking. And that's why I think I appreciate one of the things that you came up with, that I think was really helpful, even in our partnership, was the date before you marry concept. And I use that all the time. Matter of
Yeah.
fact, any engagement that we're involved with or any kind of coaching scenario, we spend time in, like, 3 months is kind of like seems to be the right amount of time
Yeah,
to
I
get
think
to
so.
know each other in a work environment where you actually have some of the stresses. I expect people to put some skin in the game in that period of time, right? But you're not working for free forever. But the idea is to be able to get to know each other. Just like imagine if we were dating someone and decided to marry them on the first date.
That's
Usually,
yeah.
maybe reckless might be the word.
It is, but also,
It's
also it is a work marriage to a degree. It's not for life, obviously, but you start building something. It's honestly, on average, it takes about a decade to build something. That's a long time to spend every day in the same boat with someone, and people jump into those things without really thinking it through, and there's so much at stake.
yeah.
you know, it's
Like,
just
what are the odds that you're going to make the right decision in a
yeah, exactly,
1 hour conversation, right? Or, and I think that's
absolutely.
that's the irony is that we make these decisions relatively quickly based on, hey,
Hmm.
especially here's the classic one. Let's say you're a business oriented entrepreneur that you don't really have a lot of technical skills. And so you meet up with somebody, hey, I'm a software programmer.
Right.
Oh, I need a software programmer, right? They have no clue. And really, the thing is that we have to recognize is if you're not technical, then you're not going to be able to gauge the quality of that individual.
Right.
Certainly not from a technical capability. So when it comes to forming these early relationships, that could be either founder, co-founder relationships, or it could be your first hires, which are just as important. That's a process by which we need to be really careful. And I think you have to caution the emotion. You have to, have to have the breaks. You have to have people around you, I
Well,
think, which is really the key.
you and I had somebody actually sort of shepherd us through the process, right? And that
Hmm.
person wasn't necessarily even a deep expert in what we were trying to do, but we're like, look, we just want an impartial person to get with us once a month for like 3, 4 months. I don't remember how long our dating period was, and we will just say, hey, here's how it's going. Here's some things that are,
Hmm.
concerning, or we're just trying to get to know each other, and then we'll get some input, right? And
Yeah,
that was it was so simple and so helpful. you know
it
uh
really is. I mean, if you have just an outsider, you need outside
exactly.
perspective, right? And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think in life, it's just a good, I mean, this is really a good, sort of segue into what you're doing, with this program. But we need guideposts and we need people that can serve as those guideposts, I think, in
yeah.
everything that we're doing. But especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, there's a few other problems. Like I see all this all the time. I mean, it's unfortunate. We think somebody because they have domain experience is a
That's
great
right.
fit.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
say maybe you've been an insurance salesman for a long time, and we're going to build the next generation disruptive play in insurance, right? Well, just because they sell insurance doesn't mean that they're a good candidate for what you're doing. So oil and water is really a challenge. I can tell stories
That's
about violent altercations at the early stage.
I
And
think you tell a story. I actually want you to tell that story about, I think it was it related to an IPO, something like that, and the or something along those lines. But to preface that, work dynamics at work are can be really messy, right? But the entrepreneurial, the startup environment, it's just the stakes are higher,
mhm.
the risk is way higher, and it's survived. We know for a fact that 90 something percent of those ventures fail. So it's just the environment that makes it extremely hard to navigate relationships. And how do you deal with stress? How do you deal with obstacles? How do you make peace? How do you ideate? How do you create new ideas that are creative and don't offend anyone? And people, how do you create a team effort? How is it safe and challenging at the same time? How do you sort of do your rhythms of life and work ethic match the other people's so they can carry their weight? All of those questions, like, I can go on and on and on. But I do love your story about the board meeting. I think you're referring to that one. We have more than one, obviously. Can you tell that story real quick? Because
Well,
that
yeah,
was crazy.
I think that there's lots of stories, but just to amplify what you're saying, I mean, at the end of the day, people are people, right?
Yeah.
And if you put them in an environment that's high pressure, um, who they are is going to come out. And this just happened to be a situation where we were raising, I won't get into too much detail because I don't want to necessarily out the people that are involved in the story.
Yeah.
But we were raising a pretty large Series A, and went to Silicon Valley and we had our choices. It was pretty exciting. We had several term sheets. We ended up inking a deal with one particular sort of syndicate. And then we were in New York and they were in Silicon Valley. And so we had our first board meeting in New York where the venture capitalists flew in, from Silicon Valley and met us in New York. And we happened to be in this really nice boardroom, beautiful table. It was gorgeous. But right outside the conference room, there was a hallway where the executive offices were. And so the VCs had all lined up and the rest of the board members were all in around the table. And I walked down the hallway to head to the boardroom, and I see the VP of sales or EVP of sales and the president of the company in each other's face, chest to chest. Yeah, you want to go right now? Let's go. And, it was just like the week earlier, this other person had thrown a mechanical pencil, and stuck, this other guy in the arm where he had this nice, $300 Egyptian shirt, and he's bleeding through this shirt, because it's sticking, hanging out of his arm. And so, the what I would say is, we had to actually separate one of those. We had to remove one of those two people, and really primarily because they didn't have the emotional maturity.
That's right.
To deal with conflict. Mm-hmm. And conflict is always is the nature of the beast. You will have passionate, very talented individuals. Both people were very talented. Both people had their own perspective. But when you're sitting there, in a situation where you've just collected or in the process of collecting $60 million, and you have one door between, this crazy WW, F kind of scenario, I had to step in and kind of make sure that we did a little, risk mitigation there. But yeah, listen, as stressors, do you work really hard in building startups? And it's kind of a lot like marriage in that, but maybe more amplified in terms of the stress. But whatever is sort of, at the center of the argument is going to get amplified, and you have to be able to deal. You need these human skills, right? And I think the best teams are those that have worked together and ironed out those things. And that's why we say the devil that is sometimes better than a brand new team in terms of de-risking, the effort.
So what would you say before we move on to actually a really good bridge to segue to life rhythms and high performance? What would you say in your mind would be the 3 top qualities for somebody to be part of a new team? I just had someone over actually literally last night at my house who was part of a team, and they had literally a spark, a bit of a conflict with another team member. And we were talking through the dynamics. Okay, how do I respond? Who do I talk to? What could have I done differently in the moment in this particular scenario? And to me, a lot of it had to do with like not just the leadership of the team, who was leading the team, but ownership, like all the team members saying, no, in this team, we don't act like this, but we act like that. And being able to sort of collectively say, look, this is our ethos. This is how we should roll. And then even if somebody had a bad day or had very good reasons to be upset, the whole team should basically say, look, we get that. We have all the compassion in the world. There's some boundaries about how we behave because it makes it worse, right? So in your mind, could you name like top 3? What are the top 3 qualities?
Yeah, let me just make sure, since this is not we haven't rehearsed this. I said, tell me what the top 3 things related to what?
To a healthy team dynamics.
Okay, well, that's different than successful teams.
Okay, well, pick one. Do
you know what I mean? Like if you're going to presume that there's success in the gig, meaning that you're going to be successful, that's sort of a set of optics. Or you could just, there's a lot of teams that get together and do well, but they don't really, make it anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, I think that the teams that are driven, that's a presupposition that if you're going to be good, there's going to be a workability, I would say, right? There's like when you turn the engine on, it needs to hum. That
Yeah.
means, the starter needs to work, the pistons need to crank, the transmission needs to engage, like those things. It's a workability, right? Which means there's capability in each of the different functions. And so the first thing I would say, um, if we were to ask the question this way, what are the top three things for successful teams? And just leave it at that. I think it would be, for me, it would be complementary skill sets first,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
because there's how you set the table. You don't want to have two CEOs. This whole co-CEO thing, I don't get.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's some situations where it makes sense, but in my mind, you need a lead, right? And it's classic mistake to have 50-50
Mm-hmm.
ownership stakes, and things that are actually ventures that you're trying to build and or develop value. But I think that there needs to be leadership. There needs to be a complementary skill set. So I think looking back, there's about four key people that you need. Ideally, if you can start with all four is great, but you can always kind of start with two and leg into the third and fourth. But for example, you need somebody who's sort of the sales and marketing lead, right? Somebody who's going to be the voice to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
You need somebody who can sort of make the cheese. You need the chef, you need the engineer, you need the chief technical officer, whatever, chief product.
Yeah.
Usually
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
combination of product and technical. And those can be one or two people. But then there's the third part. You need the finance person that's sort of putting together the process. And sometimes that person's dealing with HR as well and operations, sometimes if they're skilled in that way. But usually they're not. And so there's a fourth element, which is usually operational dynamics, service management,
Mm-hmm.
ops. And so there's just people who are good ops people. There are people who are good creators, and there are people who are good, sort of sales and marketing people. And so I think at the end of the day, any of those can be the leader, but you ideally need somebody that can corral the yahoos together and help them
So
make
basically,
make,
what you're
make cheese.
saying, let me repeat back to you. One is complementary skills. The other one's leadership, right? Is that like a clear leader, somebody who calls the
To
shots?
what you just said, I mean, there needs to be, put it this way, I think that you can have like a triumvirate, or even you can have three or four that lead together, but that needs to be a very workable,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
dynamic. That
Is
doesn't
there?
mean you have to have one leader, because each of these people are leaders in their own field. That's sort of the key, is where they all come together. Where does that
Yeah.
happen? And
Mm-hmm.
and so ultimately, I was unusual in that I was like the chief technical officer, product guy, and I led the conversation in the Silicon Valley for the capital because I happen to have the relationships there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then, but then at the end of the day, we had people who are very capable. So I think the first, to me, it comes back to the talent. There's two things that are really, really critical. And I'm not sure where I am on my list of three, but there's two things that are critical. Well, first thing is, being concerned about how you design the team. And number two is that has to be I think it's about talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Just the caliber of it.
one of the quickest ways to have a flywheel fly off the engine or whatever is if you have one person who doesn't have the same work ethic or doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
the same talent. And this, we also experienced this too. We had a person, we had the four of us, and then the fifth person was sort of forced on us by an outside investor. But
Yeah.
it was like oil and water, just didn't work. We
Yeah.
were all
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
sharp New York
Interesting.
guys, and he came in more from a telco background and
Mm-hmm.
had ugly brown suits with really bad socks. And I mean, the point is, the
Yeah.
DNA and so basically he walked around and changed light bulbs while the rest of us worked. I mean, that
Yeah.
was really part of the beginning of the end, because when you don't have that same DNA, talent meets, work ethic,
Mm-hmm.
then you lose mutual respect. And I
That's right.
think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that's really critical, is mutual respect and honor.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's no fun when you're working 70 hours a week and one guy comes in 15 hours a week. That
Doesn't quite
doesn't
work.
fly, right?
No. No.
Yeah.
No.
So I think the talent is a key thing, but along with talent, there's this aspect of work ethic. And then I think the other part of it is, this aspect of emotional maturity, right? Some people
So
are just super talented, but sometimes you get this
yeah.
super talented, but super unstable
Emotional
kind of thing.
intelligence, relational sort
Yeah.
of
But I would
capabilities,
put
all of
them in
that.
that order. I can deal with a little bit of instability if they're
Yeah,
super talented. Like you, the classic thing is to have a team. I used to have a team of geeks that were tatted up and had pierced everything, and they had long hair. They were kind of classic
yeah,
Unix looking guys, right? That were, and
yeah.
I love these guys. And it was like quirky. They were quirky. We had a couple of really attractive women that worked for the office, and they would freeze up when the attractive women walked by. It was just a
Uh,
classic dynamic of
that's fascinating. Yeah,
I mean, I have
interesting.
some funny stories there, but it's I think it's about helping each of the pieces of the puzzle fit together and then make sure those pieces can stay together without sort of vibrating out of control.
The other thing that was to me when I spoke to which I see very rarely. I spoke to Chip Conley, and this is one of the interviews on the YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, if you're in the audience, he was brought into Airbnb early stage as the modern elder. That's what they called him because they were all young startuppers and they wanted experience.
The
And to
gray
me,
hair
that
guy.
yeah, that was, and he was sort
That's
of
pretty common.
yeah, I think that's a really incredible move strategically to bring sort of somebody who has a big picture who can just sort of um, basically supply wisdom. That's what he said. He said, I was there to provide wisdom primarily and some other functions as well, but wisdom was the primary thing. And according to him, it made a huge difference in the success of the company long term. So I think
Well,
that's
that
very
is one
wise.
of those risk factors.
Yeah.
So there's a risk to not bringing in the gray hair. And there's also a big risk, like I was just describing, the DNA is different.
Mm-hmm.
Generationally can be different,
Yeah.
right? And so that person has to adapt to the environment. Every company has a DNA, and it's sort of the, I wouldn't even say it's culture, it's just the way it operates. Like we had two different like I was an IBMer, had trained in traditional business, process and
Mm.
had professionalism, right? And then I had a partner who was sort of a real estate guy that, was a little more freewheeling, I'll say, right? And so I was always there, oh Lord, we're gonna have HR issues.
Yeah.
And he was very comfortable with that risk. So the point is that there's when I talk about the DNA of people coming in from the outside, it's a high risk.
Okay, so
It may
let's
be
move.
high reward, but it may be high risk in
Yeah.
terms of being able to. So it's again all about how you build and synthesize teams.
So let's talk about life rhythms and high performance. And I think this is a topic, a dimension that is really dear to our hearts, both of us, because of different reasons. But we both sort of had experienced tremendous amounts of pressure that comes with either scaling or success or whatever, and that derails the way you operate in sort of crucial elements, crucial dimensions of life, and then it sort of derails the gig at the end of the day, right? So life rhythms came in, into my life, into your life, and you and I sort of talk about it quite a bit. And so let's talk about maybe just very specific, without sort of too many backstories and everything. What works for me? What works for you? And of course, we sort of overlap quite a bit. But why are we so passionate about the life rhythms and in relation to doing better work, excellent work, life changing work?
Yeah. Well, it's fundamentally about how do you build well, right? Like
Hmm.
for example, would really suck if you build a house and it falls over the next day.
Yeah.
That's a bad thing, right? And so there's foundational elements, right? I think what you're referring to. How
Yeah.
do you build sustainable how do you build things that last? And how do
Hmm.
you do it without shooting yourself in the process?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I think that's what you're
Oh.
alluding to. And so, for me, it's very easy to overinvest. And I think for a lot of technical people and talented sort
Hmm.
of people who are um, passionate or driven, it's easy we say sort of get out beyond your skis or get out over your skis.
Hmm.
It's easy to overinvest. It's easy to overinvest in a startup. It's easy to overinvest in a lot of things in life, but so you need guides. You need people to give you sort of feedback, or you'd be wise to get feedback,
Yeah.
right? And, we're a little bit odd as startup people, especially in the tech space. Like you do have, there's a chunk of flesh it takes, but there's a healthy way to do it. And we have friends that do it, even to this day, right?
Hmm.
And friends that have not done it well. And the sad thing is the risk is so high. You could literally wipe out your finances, wipe out your relationship, wipe out your health,
Yeah.
and be staring down the abyss.
Hmm.
On the other end, you could build, you know, effectively, and you could have great relationships, and you could have a great wife and great kids, and maybe your kids still like you
That would be a
and want
plus.
and
That
want
would
to
be a
be
plus.
around you. And those are the
Uh-huh.
I think those are the two sort of
Yeah.
dichotomies that we're talking about. How do
Well,
you build well? And we're not
there's
taught
a
that in high school. We're not. Where do you learn this stuff, right?
no one teaches you that. That's my point. Yeah, it's there's a really good quote by Mark Randolph. He's the founder of Netflix. He goes, "I don't want to be on my seventh. I've decided long ago. I'm sort of paraphrasing that I'm not going to be on my seventh startup and also my seventh divorce, basically." And that's a great quote. I just love that because it goes into the heart of things, right? People that build stuff, they are obsessive usually, and they're single-minded, and everything else is just goes by the wayside. That happened with me. I was, a peak of success, my very first sort of professional success, and completely tanking personally, like clinically depressed, basically, right? Which sort of starts taking away from even the thing that you're trying to build. But I think for me, let's maybe rattle off some of the things that work for us. And for me, one of them was spiritual practices, just contemplation, prayer, scripture. It's sort of the rhythm of a daily reconnection of who you are with a higher purpose, with a sort of broader perspective of how the world really works. To me, that's a one. I think the other one is learning how to build relationships and maintain them. So it's learn how to date, learn how to get married, learn how to not lose your marriage, and how to make your marriage flourish. That whole continuum, people don't teach you that. They don't teach you that in school. They may teach you that in family, and most of the times it's sort of not well modeled. I come from three generations of broken homes, right? And that's
Hmm.
objectively one of the most essential parts of human flourishing is having a healthy family. And I didn't have one, and I didn't even know how to start to build one. So it took a while to learn that, and it changed my life. What are some things for you?
Probably, I mean, similar, but I would maybe articulate it slightly differently. For me, it would be context.
Yeah,
So in life, it's so easy, like, and you're driving down this road, you have to get to this destination. It's nice to have context. I mean, it's nice to understand that the arc of your life, right,
yeah.
is in the context for me of spiritual or like an eternal life perspective,
Hmm.
right? So I'm not just trying to overinvest in a year or here or 10 years or 30 years in this without the context of knowing the why. Like,
Exactly.
I need a roadmap, right? I'm
That's
not that
good.
sharp. I
That's
need a
good.
roadmap. So that's the context. And then I think there's the purpose, why you do what you do.
Mm.
All right. To me, it's like so easy to lose that.
Yeah.
Why? Because especially if I think a lot of us, we were trying to make it, or maybe we were fighting against an internal voice that says we're a failure or whatever. And so you're driving up the mountain. It's not even conscious. It's just a subconscious drive. And
Yeah.
you're trying to get to some level of success for maybe even in your own identity. So that's really important to understand where your identity comes from, right? Does your identity come from work, or does your identity come from who you are? And
Yeah.
ultimately who God says you are, and that
You
you're
are not,
valuable as
yeah,
you
you are not
are,
your
right?
job. You're not your success. You're not your bank
Yeah,
account. You're not your status. You're not your role.
yeah.
And yeah,
And then
absolutely.
I think thirdly would be the pursuits. I mean, it's the pursuits, and then inside of context, inside of the purpose, you have pursuits, and there's can be tactical, strategic, can be marriage, could be dating, could be learning and to play golf. But I know many people who are, well, not many people, but I know some people who are obsessive with golf. They spend all their time knocking a little ball around the around the course, and it's actually a wonderful game. I love the game of golf, but if you think about it in context, again, put it in the context of what we're doing. If you
Yeah.
were an alien, you flew in, it would be like this. Like, these people are out there knocking this ball from hole to hole, and I mean, to me, it's so we need to understand that our pursuits, it could be the pursuit of pleasure, it could be the pursuit of achievement, but these pursuits have to have context and purpose. That's to me, like, and then it's practical things like you need people in your life, like to
Yeah.
even Like, I
Well,
think when
how?
you like, I needed like somebody, like I had people in my life, but not everybody will come in and actually speak that kind of truth to you. The question is,
Yeah,
where do you get truth spoken from? I think a lot of people go to therapists or whatever,
which
and
is good.
that's
Yeah.
not truth per se. That's
Hmm.
just mirror. I think that's more of like, hey,
Oh,
they'll
interesting.
mirror back to you, right? But it's not
Yeah.
like they're going to be giving you truth serum.
Yeah, I get it. I know what you
Does
mean
that
then.
make
Yeah.
sense? Like in my perspective. So it wasn't until like we met that I think you really helped with a lot of things that I was sort of trying to balance. Um, but I was unbalanced, and I think there's just so many reasons why we can get unbalanced. But ultimately, it requires a friend, somebody willing to talk to you, and that's
Hmm.
capable, to sort of balance these things out. That's why I think your program's so helpful, because you have this balance structure and it's truth in 7 dimensions. And
Hmm.
that sort of becomes the context for this. I think it also,
Yeah.
if you look at your context of your life, my observation would be you've learned these things over an arc in life, right? You didn't have
Yeah,
them when
that's
you were
true.
young. And so
Yep.
you're very passionate about it. This goes all the way back to your formation. This has been interesting because I was reading, your latest chapter. I think maybe it's the latest chapter or one of the chapters in your latest book,
Yeah.
and it was really fascinating to me because I forget, like I've only known you in the U.S. and I
That's right. Yeah.
forget, I forget that you have a context of being
Yeah.
raised where freedom
Uh-huh.
wasn't wasn't available, right?
Yep.
And you had glimpses of it, but to me, like I was raised in freedom, and so it's really interesting for ourselves to really understand sort of the genesis of who we are from the context. We started with, I mean, that's one of the things I mentioned was context of your life.
Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe I don't know if you want to jump in, but I'd love to get your thoughts on the why are you writing this book, one, and then two, talk a little bit about context of life.
I really do. Let me rattle off three things because I care deeply about the sort of the life rhythms thing because it changes your life forever. So you and I share some of the same things. Morning ritual, there's a spiritual ritual. We share sort of the Sabbath rest life rhythm, which basically is like
Yes,
this
very much.
reset, complete reset, and it allows you to work super hyper hard, be very, very creative, expend a lot of emotional labor, and then be able to be completely replenished and do it again without burning out. And I think to me, that's a huge deal that most professionals, ambitious people can learn. It's an incredibly hard thing. Most people that I teach that to don't take to it. They were like, "Oh, it's too much. I don't think I can handle that." And then the third is relationally is sort of a rhythm of relational deep relationships. So friends that you have a rhythm with,
Mm.
and of course your spouse, right? We go on a weekly date. I'm actually going on a date with Deb tonight because some time freed up, and but those are rhythms that you can establish and they will carry you in tremendous ways. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because
No,
I feel
it's
so
great. I
strongly
mean,
about this.
you're getting very practical. I was getting very ethereal. I was
I
getting
know, yeah, yeah,
contextual,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
I think that yeah, absolutely. Those are, I mean, I don't know what I would do without my Sabbath practice,
yeah.
the dating practice, the rituals in the morning. All of those things are critical. Just a daily, I mean, life
Oh,
and breath. And
oh
I mean,
yeah,
I don't know how I
absolutely.
would. I don't know how I dealt with life before Sabbath. Honestly, it's really
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Anyway, I don't
it's a
want to
joy.
share that with our audience because I feel like these are things that are actually not talked about hardly at all,
Yeah.
and they're transformative.
What's really funny is that most people that we know, right, like who even talk about some of these things, they're in the context of your, definitely in the
Mm,
context of your communicating these things. How many of them actually pick them up? Like this
yeah.
is the difference between,
Oh, it's very few. Very few.
concept and actually practice, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Very few.
And so that's why I think you need, like we talk about, we're the sum of the 5 people that we spend
Yeah.
time with, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's really true because I think of the people that I've learned from you and people have learned from me, and so now I have context of people who do these same practices. It's really funny. We have a couple friends in common that are just flourishing right now in their 50s
Hmm.
because they've adopted some of these practices, lost weight,
Hmm.
healthier,
Yeah.
happier. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah,
Yeah,
it's exciting.
it's amazing. So, okay, so about the book. So, if you're listening to this and you're going, what on earth are they talking about? I'm basically writing this. I was compelled, I was convinced by my wife, but compelled by some of my experience to write a book called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. And the reason I've been, Deb, basically my wife said, you have to write this book is because I ramble about America in a positive light a lot. And some people may think, oh, he's just being, he's not objective. And I can promise you, I am very subjective. And yet at the same time, I have a perspective that I think most Americans don't. And I think because of that, I have an appreciation that most Americans don't as well. So that's basically the context. So I've been writing this book and posting a rough draft on my newsletter, christianrayflores.com. There's like a little tab there, sneak peek, new book sneak peek, chapter by chapter. And chapter 2 deals with sort of this incredible reality that freedom in America is like, it's just like breathing. It's so natural. And for Americans, that's normal because if you've breathed clean oxygen, clean air your whole life, you go, well, this is just how it is. And I basically offer a perspective from my life where I've actually been in several countries that freedom was not available. There was a lot of oppression, and so I talked about the USSR. I talked about how I would go to East Berlin and then I would cross over to West Berlin, what the contrast was, and I talk about how.
Let me ask you a few things,
Yeah, go ahead.
specifics. Once you give the
Yeah,
finish with your arch of the book, I'd like to ask you a couple of things about that specifically because it's really fascinating to me.
yeah, and I talk about sort of how freedom is very fragile. You can't take it for granted, and what we have here in the U.S. is super super important, and we should appreciate it, protect it, nurture it. So that's basically the general gist of that chapter.
Mm. It's really interesting and refreshing, I think, because if you look at just politics and you look at social media and you look at the history, like when I was a kid, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day in
Wow.
school.
Mhm. Is
Every
that
day you
right?
stood up, yeah, and said the Pledge of Allegiance. In one generation, that's gone, right?
Yeah.
For the most
Hmm.
part.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think there's a lack of appreciation for freedom. Like you say, it's like, does a fish, appreciate the water,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you didn't have that water. And so you had some, in this last chapter I read, really interesting. You described sort of the contrast between East Berlin and West Berlin.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, like, what are the things that were so, like, I'm curious. Well, first of all, when you growing up in that, like, what are the things that we don't do? Like, as an alien, you're kind of an alien, at some level compared to me living here,
Yeah.
growing up. You look at me. What is different about you just by programming
Hmm.
that than us Americans that grew up in this freedom, maybe? Like,
Well,
what are the top three things that in your mind, just if
I
you
would
want to
say,
rattle them off? Or,
I would say, let's say top three out of the top of my head: freedom to choose as a normal baseline. That's one. The second one is sort of fear of the state.
mm,
In America, the baseline is there is no fear of the state. It doesn't exist. Um,
we
and
sort
then
of joke about the state, right?
exactly. And then the other one I think is sort of this ability to this vision for that anything is possible. So if I would go in order, for example, of what's the first thing I did? I said it was freedom of choice, right?
Freedom to
So
choose. Yeah.
freedom to choose in Russia, you couldn't own private property. It was severely limited what you can own as a person. You couldn't leave the country without permission. You couldn't live even within the Soviet Union. You couldn't live in a city, the city of Moscow, without being permitted to live in the city. Even within the country, there are sort of limitations on where you can move. You couldn't
Wow.
own foreign currency. You could go to jail for owning foreign currency without a certificate of some sort. You couldn't sell and buy. Commerce was very restricted. So
The
all of
education process must have been very controlled, right?
controlled and also filled with
Information.
one narrative, very propaganda, very much very narrow.
You're
As
not really
most
free to speak. Like, we're just free. We think we have free speech. right?
which is actually a really good segue to the second thing, fear of the state, right? I was, in high school, and I was born in Moscow. I grew up in Chile, Germany, Africa, then came back to Russia. I was in high school. So in a history class, I would just raise my hand, clueless, and because I didn't have that baseline of fear of the state, and I would say, "Hey, how come we're in Afghanistan? This is not our war. I don't understand why we invaded Afghanistan." Or, and then on another occasion, I mentioned, um, "I don't understand why the Bolsheviks assassinated the family of the Tsar, like with kids and maids and everybody. They killed the kids. Why? It's so cruel." And I remember the look of fear in the eyes, not only of the teachers but the kids, and that sort of terrified me. How can you be 17 years old and already know that you shouldn't speak certain things? You shouldn't have certain opinions, or that opinion doesn't correlate to the party, which by the way, party line came from where? From the Soviet Union, Communist Party line. That's why it's called party line, right? The other sort of term that the Soviets invented was politically correct. Not correct, not true or untrue, or but politically correct. What the state approves is politically correct. If you say something that the state doesn't approve, it's not politically correct.
Funny how
So
we've inheritated that term.
exactly, we've imported some of the
Yeah.
terminology even.
But let me ask
Um,
you a quick question in parenthetically there. So I imagine that people were asking or thinking some of the same questions that you had.
yeah,
Or is it so oppressive that you just stopped thinking?
there were people that the masses were afraid to think because they didn't want to get in trouble.
Huh.
Those
Wow.
of us who were unconvinced, let's put it that way, of the bright socialist future that awaited us, that was always around the corner and never seemed to materialize, and we were more skeptical. So they had we would listen to these FM radios, like shortwave radios rather,
Hmm.
and then we would sort of tune in. It was illegal, into BBC, Voice of America. I think it was Radio Liberty was the third one,
Wow.
and it
Yeah.
was like, and the Soviets had actual jamming stations to jam the signal, but they couldn't get rid of all of it. So the sound was terrible. But in the middle of the night, we'd just be in a kitchen over vodka and tea, and listen to the news, and sort of these
Wow.
forbidden words, forbidden music. None of that was sort of going through. And then they developed this thing called samizdat, which is actually also broadly used in the English language. Samizdat means self-publishing. So people would literally type on these typing machines several copies of the forbidden books. Like
This is, I mean, this is amazing. So not only was your voice controlled
yeah,
or muted, but
yeah,
also your thinking by nature was muted.
yeah.
Well, what does that do to an entire country? I mean, just
It's
think about
yes,
the implications of muting both your voice and your mind.
yeah. I think it just creates a herd mentality. It creates a an unthinking, uncreative, unentrepreneurial people.
So where does joy
Fearful
come
people.
from in that context? Like
Just
where,
human.
like, I mean, like we're used to like
Yeah.
achieving and thinking and doing and entrepreneurs where if you can't do that, like what does that by default create in terms of societal joy? Like where's the juice?
The juice was really just base foundational human love, friendship, playing in a guitar around the fire, somewhere, like at a camping trip where there's no one's listening to you, you know, being with friends in the kitchen and sort of talking forbidden things
Hmm.
about freedom
But there's not a
or
lot of
about possibility.
ambition or anything
No,
like that,
there's
right?
zero upward mobility. There's zero upward mobility. The only upward mobility was available to bureaucrats and people that were corrupt. So an average, and that's why I contrast in the book that, let's say, an average American kid, there's a high percentage of kids that say, I'm going to start my business when I grow up. In the Soviet Union, the dream was, I'm going to become a bureaucrat. That's sort of the highest level that you can possibly rise. And then there's a lot of corruption because of that, a lot of just small, petty sort of bending of the rules, stealing, things like that. And to your question about why did we go to Berlin? we had my mom, who was a single mom. She raised my sister and I. Had made a little bit of money. I mean, and I'm saying a little bit of money. And she had foreign currency in a German bank account because of her work overseas. And she would um, we would go to East Germany because we had a cousin there, and then she couldn't leave East Berlin to go to West Berlin because she was a Soviet citizen. But my sister and I, who were teenagers, could because we had double citizenship. So we had Chilean passports. So we'd show up at checkpoint Charlie or whatever that was, and we would cross over. They would let us through and back, and then over there we would take some marks and we would buy like VCRs and the first personal computers and some cassette recorders like boom boxes, and we would like two teenagers, okay, and we would bring him back to East Berlin. Then it would take him to Russia and would sell them in the black market for like fivefold or
So you were
sevenfold.
like operating the underground.
I was, yeah, we were like, and it was
And
not
you
none of
couldn't, they
that was
couldn't,
legal.
they, as much as you were raised there, they couldn't beat it out of you. I mean, you had this ambition
I did,
that,
yeah, yeah, and
which is interesting because thankfully you were born somewhere else. But
yeah,
it's just amazing me to think that they have ambition, but the ambition is for the state. That's the only thing
yes,
you can have ambition for, right?
that's
Is
right, yeah.
maybe if
So,
you're a great,
well,
I knew some.
if you think about it, to this day, right? Even Russia, 30 years after the fall of communism, what are the things that, let's say, Russia, that inherited the Soviet Empire or part of it, that produces that is competitive on in the international market? The,
Sports, Olympics.
well, that's not a product, right? But
No, I mean, okay.
it's war
That's what I
machines.
think of though. They've been a machine trying to compete and they're to
It's
maintain their perception,
anything
right?
that elevates the state. That's what they're invested in and historically developed
Right.
some skills in, right? So killing machines, space machines, uh, arms, etc., tanks, planes, things like that. uh, have you ever seen a Russian computer sold on the international market, or phone, or laptop, or even a toaster? You will not see one.
An automobile, like you
An
mentioned, I think in
automobile,
your
they're
book.
terrible
Yeah.
automobiles. Yes. Oh, as a matter of fact, one of the things I mentioned is that, that my brain explodes. So Berlin, of course, was delineated east and west. After a few years, when people start running from east to west, they put a wall to keep people in, right? Not to
Right.
keep people out, to keep people in. So the same nation, same culture, same language that produced Mercedes-Benz and BMW, the best driving machines on the planet, right? Audi. In the East Berlin, just a few decades later, they lost the ability to create any of those things, and they produce. If for the audience, if you look it up on Google, this atrocious car called the Trabant, and it was like a death box. It was awful. It was completely. It was it is, in my opinion, the worst car ever produced by the same Germans who produced the Mercedes Benz. Okay, so that is, if that doesn't illustrate you the difference between freedom, a climate where people can choose and move freely and invent and innovate and create, and a climate where people can't. I don't know what does, right? So
Wow.
American freedom is an amazing thing, and we should protect it. And I just love it. I think, and what concerns me, I think, with America now is that you can see a movement towards state overreach, government overreach, along a whole variety of vectors. And in my experience, when the state and the government gains a new power that becomes a baseline, they tend to not want to give it back. So, and that's my concern with America, is that it's slowly drifting towards much more government control than I think it's necessary, and which is counterproductive. I think it's not going to be helpful for the country.
That's fascinating. I mean, you think about just the contrast between the Trabant and the automobiles that we like to drive today.
You have a Beamer, I have an Audi,
How
right?
much how
Like,
much would you pay for a Trabant?
I don't remember, but I do remember
No, no, I'm
this.
saying today, if you
Oh,
somebody propose.
actually, people do pay for it now because it's a collectible, apparently.
Okay,
So it
okay.
became this cult
Yeah,
following of the terrible
right.
car, the worst car ever made. They have a museum
It's
of the Trabant,
hilarious.
apparently. But even at the time, because of how inefficient, unfree societies are. If you were a East German family and you wanted a Trabant, you could actually wait for years to buy one because there were things just don't work in unfree societies, right? Even if you have the money, you can't
Hmm.
buy a terrible car. You have to wait for years. You have to wait in line.
It's really fascinating because if you control the voice and you control the mind,
Yep,
right,
that's right. Yep,
then you stifle innovation
yeah.
unless it's directed towards, a particular direction. But then you're still, how do you turn it back on? Like, how do you take a mind that's been repressed and then say, hey, okay, now develop the bomb, right? Go after, like, I don't know how that would work in terms of,
The guy who,
segregating,
the guy,
segregating.
the guy who is the author of the space program in the Soviet Union. His last name was Korolev. The guy who basically sent the first person to space. He was so gifted, but you know where they got him from to work on the space program? From a gulag.
Ah,
He was
okay.
in a labor camp for whatever reason, and they were like, "Yeah, I think we need this guy," and they pulled him out. How depressing is that?
I mean, all right. So this is, I mean, to me, I have to process this. This would take me a while to kind of think about all the implications. So to me, I can't even conceive. And you're
Yeah,
living in a world where you're just. So tell me, like, when you came to the U.S., there must have been just a like
yeah. I think it was
like
the
how long has
more
it taken? And maybe like there's so many things I'm gonna try to constrain myself here, but
sure.
maybe one question is like, what was the wildest thing that you can think of that that sort of the mind blowing thing, and then two, how is this? How do you still find yourself over time, decades later,
Yeah,
with
I do.
these sort of moments?
I do. I still, and I'm grateful that although I've assimilated, and I definitely it's a new baseline for me to have an amazing life in America that is more prosperous than I ever imagined it would be for me, especially considering my starting point as a refugee. Um, I I still find myself every once in a while going, "What a miracle this country is." You know, like I look the neighborhood I live in, right? The trails, the clean everything, the beautiful highways that cover the whole country, literally the whole country. You can go anywhere, and you have no fear in most places. So it really does move me emotionally even now. But if I were to sort of remember two quick instances, I visited America several times. I started, the country was free. I was traveling more. I had a music career and stuff like that. So I came quite a bit. But as a tourist, you sort of go, you come and you leave. When you move here, I moved with my wife Deb, and there was right before I moved. Okay, so here's the first level of immersion is that we start visiting because we were coming for Christmas to see Deb's parents, and she took me to a Petco, and she took me to a Petco to get some gifts for the dog that we had in Russia. And I'm walking around, and it dawned on me that they had a supermarket for pets, and I've never seen one before. Like I think they were just beginning to have the little pet shops. And I turned to them and was like, "Do you?" And I storm out of the. I was overwhelmed. I was I was angry. I was almost hyperventilating, and I walk out, storm out of the store, and Deb follows me into the parking lot. She goes, "What's wrong?" And she goes, and I go, "Is this? You have a supermarket for pets? Do you know how many people are hungry in the world?" And she was so funny because she was so apologetic, like, "Yeah, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, and at the time I was angry, but now I'm grateful because there's nothing wrong with having pet supermarkets if your whole society is so prosperous, right? But at the time, it made me angry. Actually was overwhelmed and upset, and now I go to Petco all the time. It doesn't phase me. The other moment that was really moving to me is that Deb took me to her hometown. It was Horicon, Wisconsin. It's a small town, 3,500 population, 3,500, I think. And she took me around to her home and to her high school, and we were touring her high school. And I remember was tearing up, and I said, this is a town, of course, that she couldn't wait to get out of when she was a teenager, right? This is a town that didn't impress her in any way, shape, or form because she was used to it. and she felt sort of constrained and she wanted a bigger life, etc. But for me, the insight was you go outside of most third world countries, non-Western countries, let's put it that way. You go outside of the capital where all the money is, 100 miles, and the landscape changes completely, right?
Mhm.
Um, like this is a well-known fact that, for example, in Russia, 20% of the households in Russia do not have an indoor toilet today.
Wow.
You go to Moscow, you don't see that. You go to Moscow and St. Petersburg, they're just incredible
Mhm.
tourist destinations and amazing food, great restaurants, beautiful buildings, highways. And to me, the value was not that. The value is that I was in the middle of nowhere, Horicon, Wisconsin. Most people in Wisconsin don't know where Horicon is. And the roads were clean and smooth, and the houses were pretty and manicured. And I walked the high school, and it was glistening and perfectly clean. A high school that I'd never dreamed of being part of in anywhere, any of the countries that I lived in. And this was in the middle of nowhere. So an average, normal, in the middle of nowhere person could live this kind of life. To me, that's remarkable about this country.
Mm. So interesting because what you've just illustrated is how context, even Deb growing up there, eliminates appreciation.
Yeah.
If you're not, if you're just used to, if you're used to the environment, and sort of, I have to ask, that sort of begs the question. I mean, do you think there's a risk in the U.S. for us to actually be one generation away from, you know, a shift? I mean, I guess that's the question. What is the risk in the US? We have all this context and
Yeah.
all this lack of appreciation, right? People complaining about everything. Whereas one trip to somewhere else may help them a little bit, right, in terms of context. But I mean, we have this, even if you look at what's happening in San Francisco and major cities, where there's sort of this shift towards um, almost a socialist, more
Mm-hmm.
of a, I mean, at least the trend, I would say, right, is blowing in
Mm-hmm.
some places towards us. What would you say to us as Americans? Like, what do we need to? Is it just a wake up call, or is it kind of like now that you've lived in both places, what would be your guidance for us?
I would say, yeah, yeah, I think it's a wake up call. I think my concern is that most great empires, most great civilizations, and I think in most dimensions, America is not an empire in a classical. It could be an economic empire, but it's not an empire in this sort of this overbearing. We invade other countries and take them over kind of way.
From a governing perspective, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but it is part of a great Western civilization. And to me, understanding that you are part of a great civilization is something that is becoming less and less obvious to people as they succumb to an actually very intentional information war of basically blackening the name, darkening the all of it. Like it's a war. There's actually a great book called War in the West by Douglas Murray, War in the West, and it's scary, right? And it basically delineates a very intentional campaign that of people that don't like Western civilization. And then our people believe, and I'm fine if people that want to do something different don't like us, right? That's totally fine. And but the truth is, they are convincing Americans that America is less than one, and it's a wonderful civilization, very imperfect, has all kinds of flaws, all kinds of crimes, not only flaws, but it
Mm.
is by far the best environment for human flourishing. America and Western countries in general, but
Right.
there's an actual war against Western civilization, and great civilizations almost always fall from within before they get sort of toppled from outside and sort of
Right.
finished up. And I think my concern is, that's a long answer, is that um, we will lose in America love, appreciation, stop nurturing what makes us American, and that will bring us to regress and sort of stagnation, and then eventually the whole thing crumbles. My hope is that America has enough DNA, this healthy freedom, entrepreneurial, creative DNA to counter the virus essentially. But the
Hmm.
virus is definitely here. It's already infected. So that's sort of my hope. The jury's out, but I'm bullish, right? I feel like if anyone can beat this, it's America, because it's a very strong culture, I think.
That's great. I know we have to probably kind of wind up, but really interesting like conversation for me. I think if you were to just summarize like what makes America great
Hmm.
in
I
maybe a
think it's
condensed form, I mean, do you have a
yeah.
thought
Actually, I have
there?
like I'm writing this book. It's like 10 chapters, the 10 reasons, right? And I don't
Hmm.
remember all of them right now off the top of my head. But you can go to christianflores.com and see it chapter by chapter. Sign up so I can send you a signed copy eventually. But it's freedom, entrepreneurship, it's faith, it's generosity. All of these things are cultural treasures. Innovation, all of those
But don't
things.
all those kind of stem from freedom, right?
They
Like
really do.
freedom to
Yeah,
have your
yeah,
faith, freedom to have your ambition,
yeah.
right?
It's
Entrepreneurship,
it's a
freedom to have
perfect,
family.
if the term is a perfect storm in a negative way, this is America somehow beautifully, miraculously, the stars actually aligned and created a positive perfect storm of human flourishing. So that's sort of my theory, and I sort of delineate it quite a bit in the book. And it's very unique. It is the product of Western civilization, but it's also the pinnacle, I think, of Western civilization in my opinion. And it is very, 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 very unique. It's not something that can be easily replicated, and that's why
Yeah.
when America starts doing nation building, like saying, "Of course, everybody wants this," it just doesn't work because the stars didn't align in other places the way they aligned here in the U.S.
Well, it's really interesting because if you think about it, we're only 250 years old as a country.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, that is really a blip on the radar when it comes to civilization, right?
It really is. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting that we hope that this antibody, this as you call it, that our
Hmm.
antibodies are strong enough, and our DNA is strong enough to be resilient during all kinds of shift in
Hmm. Yeah.
economic shift, political shift, right? Environmental shift. There's just a lot of challenges ahead. I think it's really helpful. I think this book is a really good sort of signpost as a stake in the ground to say, hey, like get some perspective, right? Like
Yeah. I
have
mean,
context for what,
exactly.
appreciation, really have appreciation for what we have
Yeah.
currently and don't take it for granted, right? Is
And
that sort of,
my hope is not to make a holistic case or a scientific case. I'm just saying, hey, this is one person, one immigrant who lives here and is incredibly grateful and sees. Can I offer you a few illustrations? If you want reasons to love America more, this is a good book. If you're looking
yeah.
for reasons to not love America more, you're probably going to be more irritated by the book than anything
Well, I
else.
want I want one of the early signed copies, if you
Oh,
would.
of course, that's guaranteed, man.
I'm there,
Absolutely.
man. I want to have this. We can look back on this thing 100 years from now. Well, maybe I
Yeah,
might not be.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Our kids and say, yeah, that was the moment when I think it could be really significant. Personally, it's the little things, right?
yeah,
It's the little things that move the needle, I think, and sometimes just appreciation is one of those little things that has a big effect.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely.
yeah,
All right, guys. Well, this was awesome. Brandon, thank you again for doing this with me. I love our chats. It's
my
it's
pleasure.
it's really, really cool. And so we'll see you next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central, and we'll be back on with a new set of things we want to discuss.